So we're in the last section of the book, the meaning of worship and tawassul. And we're under the heading, calling and seeking help. Calling and seeking help. Istighatha. Calling, which is nida, and seeking help, which is istighatha. To refute a Wahhabi in this issue, you must memorize the proof and not be intimidated by his spooky talk of grave worshippers. One proof that merely calling is not worship. So merely calling, that's important there. Quote unquote, merely calling is not worship. Whether the called one were alive or dead or present or absent is the aforementioned hadith of the blind man. That hadith of the blind man, remember where its points of evidence are. One, the Prophet ﷺ taught the blind man the supplication that contains calling him. The Prophet himself ﷺ, he told the blind man the dua. Allahumma inni as'aluka wa atawajjahu ilayka bi nabiyyina Muhammadin nabiyyir rahmah. Ya Muhammad, O Muhammad, etc. till the end of the dua. So the Prophet himself, he taught the blind man the supplication that contains calling him. So that's a proof that calling someone doesn't mean you're worshiping them. The blind man did the supplication in the Prophet's absence as commanded. As commanded means the Prophet himself ﷺ instructed the blind man to go away from him because he told the blind man, go to the place of wudu, make wudu, pray 2 rak'ahs, and then say this dua. So the blind man did as commanded, and he did the supplication in the Prophet's absence. And the evidence that he did it in the Prophet's absence was that the companion who related the story said, it had not been long and we had not yet dispersed when the man came back with his sight as if he had never been blind. And the companions and the scholars continued to pass this dua on after the Prophet's death, alayhi salatu wassalam. So this proves that calling someone is not worshiping that one, whether he were alive or dead or present or absent. Question: what if they say here that he was not requesting anything from the dead? What if they say, well, this hadith, the blind man wasn't requesting anything from the dead when he called on the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam? This is merely the Wahhabi deflecting because he was caught red-handed in his contradiction. And he does not want to stop talking and appear defeated. So just ask him then a question that requires a simple yes or no. Is it permitted to call the dead? That's the question. Yes or no? Remember, it is they who came with this talk in the first place. That's why we're asking them this question. They're the ones who brought this up. He will not say yes without restricting it, but he cannot say no because the hadith demonstrates otherwise. So you say to him, just simple question. Is it permissible to call the dead? So if he repeats himself, again saying, it's not permissible to call upon the dead to ask him for something, which is not your question. You didn't ask him, is it permissible to call upon the dead to ask him for something? That's not the question. So do not be distracted. He is avoiding your close-ended question that only requires yes or no. Is it permissible to call upon the dead? That's my question. You're answering a different question that I didn't ask. When you say it's not permissible to call upon the dead to ask him for something, that's an answer to a different question. That's an answer to the question, Is it permissible to call upon the dead to ask him for something? That's not the question. My question, answer my question that I'm asking you. Is it permissible to call upon the dead? Period. That's my question. Yes or no? He knows that he is inwardly defeated. And now he is ready to waste your time, taking you in as many circles as he can to not appear defeated. For as long as you're willing to waste your time arguing with him. So don't let him get away with that. Tell him, I just asked you a question. Yes or no? So if he refuses to answer you, tell him, all right, the conversation is done then. Don't go further. If he doesn't want to answer this question, don't say, okay, well, let me ask you a different question. Now you're going to allow him to waste your time. If he doesn't want to answer the question, tell him you're defeated. The debate's over. Now take a few more references. 1. The story of Prophet Ibrahim and the revival of the dead birds. Allah says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي قال فخذ 4 من الطير فصرهن إليك ثم اجعل على كل جبل منهن جزءا ثم ادعهن يأتينك سعيا واعلم أن الله عزيز حكيم. And when Abraham said, My Lord, show me how you revive the dead, said God, state why you ask, since you already believe. Awalam tu'min? Don't you already believe? Why are you asking, Abraham? State the reason you are asking, since you already believe. Qala bala. He said, indeed, I do believe. I only ask to reinforce the certainty of my heart. Said God, then take 4 birds and incline them towards you for inspection. Then dismember them. Then place on every mountain a piece of them. Then stand in a central location and call them. They shall come to you flying. And know that Allah is undefeated and wise. To this, the Wahhabi would laugh if you give him this proof. He will laugh at you and say that you're being petty. So what? He's going to say, what kind of proof is this? Why are you even bringing this? Come on. You know Prophet Ibrahim wasn't worshiping the dead birds. It's not what we're talking about. But it is literally the act that they claim is shirk, calling the dead. They're the ones who said it. That is what proves that it is they who are the silly ones. Their claim is so ridiculous that they could not find it sensible to be consistent with it. Is it that calling the dead sometimes is shirk and calling the dead other times is not shirk? Or it's always shirk? If it's always shirk, then Prophet Ibrahim committed shirk because he called dead birds. In fact, upon closer inspection of their claims, Prophet Ibrahim would be more evidently a mushrik than others had they been correct, because they say, those Wahhabis, they're the ones who say, had you not worshipped that dead one or that absent one, you would not have called him, because you would not have believed that he could hear you or do anything for you. Isn't that what they say? They say, how could you call the dead one? Do you think he can do something for you? You must think he could do something for you. Why else would you call him? So by calling him now that he is dead or absent, they would say, you must have thought that he could create and help and hear you and help you. So following that reasoning, if that dead one's usually being unable to hear or respond made calling him, worshiping him, then how would that not be more so the case when it comes to calling dead, dismembered birds that did not even have minds or speech when they were alive? Here's another reference, the permission to call upon angels for help. Among what proves the validity of calling upon other than Allah without worshipping that one, even if he were absent, is what was narrated by Al-Bazzar from the route of Ibn Abbas. Inna lillahi malaikatan fil ardi wal hafadha. Surely Allah has angels who roam the earth other than the record keepers who document the deeds. يَكْتُبُونَ مَا يَسْقُطُ مِنْ وَرَقِ الشَّجَرِ, documenting what falls of tree leaves. فَإِذَا أَصَابَ أَحَدَكُمْ عُرْجَةٌ بِأَرْضٍ فَلَا. So if there afflicted one of you a difficulty in an open land, فَلْيُنَادْ, then let him call out. فَلْيُنَادْ, let him call out. أَعِينُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ, help, O slaves of Allah. So that's calling those who are not present. How do you know they can hear you? That's what Wahhabis say. How do you even know he can hear you? You must be worshiping him. So according to them, according to their reasoning, along with Prophet Adam, who he made tawassul by the Prophet when the Prophet wasn't alive, and along with the 4 Imams who verified calling on the Prophet after his death in the Tashahhud, and one of the 2 greatest prophets, Abraham, who called dead birds. Ibn Abbas is also a mushrik then, according to them, for teaching people to seek help from those who are not present. How would one know that those angels are present? And how would he know that those angels can hear him? According to Wahhabi creed, that's all kufr. Here's a third reference. Ibn Taymiyyah deemed it good to call upon the dead. A decisive Wahhabi breaker is Ibn Taymiyyah's quote in his book Al-Kalimu Tayyib عن الهيثم ibn Hanash, from the route of Al-Haytham ibn Hanash, أنه قال, that he said, كنا عند عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما, we were with Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah accept his and his father's deeds. فخضرت رجله, when his leg was inflicted with khadar. So I'm not sure the best way to translate khadar. It's not exactly paralysis. It's not shalal. Shalal is paralysis. And it's also not the tingly feeling that you have because of lack of blood flow. So I'm not sure exactly how to translate that. Might say in some translation dictionaries like Hans Wehr, maybe it says paralysis. But what I learned is that it's not shalal, paralysis. Unless there's different words there's different types of paralysis and they have different words in Arabic. So Allahu A'lam, we're just going to say khadar now. The verb is khadirat with a kasra. Khadira. Khadirat rijluhu. He had the khadar with the fatha on the dal. So when his leg was inflicted with the khadar, a man said to him, فَقَالَ لَهُ رَجُلٌ أُذْكُرْ أَحَبَّ النَّاسِ إِلَيْكَ. So a man said to him, mention the most beloved of people to you. فَقَالَ يَا مُحَمَّدْ. So he said, يَا مُحَمَّدْ فَكَأَنَّمَا نُشِطَ مِنْ عِقَالٍ. And it was as if he was released from a tie around his shins. It's as if he was tied up and he couldn't move, and then he was released, so then he could move. So Ibn Taymiyyah narrated that in his book called Al-Kalimu Tayyib. The meaning of that title, Al-Kalimu Tayyib, means the good words. So that means Ibn Taymiyyah deems that good words. Now, Wahhabi might say to you, how could that be deemed by Ibn Taymiyyah as good words when in another book Ibn Taymiyyah said such and such? The answer is, Ibn Taymiyyah contradicts himself all the time, actually. That's a good question, you ask, because it's not the only time he contradicted himself. So it's not that this is not true because he said something in another book contrary. Rather, he contradicts himself all the time. So, is Ibn Taymiyyah a mushrik or not a Wahhabi? Rather, the Wahhabi, being the hypocrite he is, will make every excuse for Ibn Taymiyyah for what he has done here. And he would accuse anyone else who does the exact same thing of committing shirk. Yani, if you said to him, how do you explain that? He might say, well, what Ibn Umar did was, the person said to Ibn Umar, mention the most beloved of people to you. Just mention him. Doesn't say call on him. So you say to him, but he did call on him. Even if the person only said mention, he actually called him. So he still called him. He said, Ya Muhammad. Or Wahhabi might say, well, the word ya is missing from some copies. No, not some copies. He would say, the word ya is not there. It just says, mention the most beloved of people to you. And so he said, Muhammad. You tell him, that's Al-Albani's perversion of the book because he had nothing else he could do but to alter the book. And it's confirmed, actually, that the narration that Ibn Taymiyyah reported was, Ya Muhammad, your people, because they're losers, they altered the narration. Or he might say, well, what Ibn Umar was doing was, he wasn't really calling on the Prophet. He was summoning up his love for the Prophet in his heart. You tell him, he did call the Prophet. He said, Ya Muhammad. He called him. He said, Ya Muhammad. That's called harf nida. Ya is harf nida. It's the calling particle. Question. What if the Wahhabi says that the hadith of Ibn Umar is weak? The report being weak or strong is beside the point. Ibn Taymiyyah considered it a good practice, whether it's weak hadith or not a weak hadith. Though it's not weak though. But don't go there with him. Stick to the point. Don't let a Wahhabi defocus you. Staying focused with a Wahhabi and with anyone else is very important and may require practice. But especially with a Wahhabi, because Wahhabis are tricky. And even if it were weak, which it's not, weak narrations can still be used for doing good deeds. But don't go there with him. He says this hadith is weak. Tell him it doesn't matter. He still documented it in a book that he called Good Words. So, did he escape shirk just because the hadith is weak according to you only? And if it were strong, he would have committed shirk? That's what you're saying? Question. What if he says that Ibn Umar only wanted to summon the Prophet in his heart? Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We refuse to be sidetracked by this attempt at, there's nothing to see here. The report verbatim says, Ya Muhammad, which is calling. Ya is harfu nida. It's the calling particle. And this incident was after the Prophet's death, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The real question is, why is it that it's only Ibn Umar who meant to conjure up the Prophet in his heart, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he said, Ya Muhammad, and anyone else who does the exact same thing after the Prophet's death is a mushrik according to you, except Ibn Taymiyyah? The only two people who got out of the judgment of being mushriks for calling on the Prophet after his death, according to a Wahhabi, are Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Umar. And anyone else who does the same thing, he's a mushrik. And he doesn't really care about saving Ibn Umar from that. He really only wants to save Ibn Taymiyyah. Question. What if he says Ibn Umar was told to mention the most beloved person to him, not to call him? Simply, he mentioned him by calling him. He could have mentioned him without calling him. And if that were a shirk, he would have known that. Abdullah bin Umar, he would have known that's shirk. And then he would not have called him. The fact that a person told him to mention is beside the point. What he actually did is the point. He called the Prophet after his death, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They play all of these word games because they believe in Ibn Taymiyyah more than they believe in the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allah made their hearts sick. They did not play these word games for the sake of Ibn Umar. It was only for the sake of Ibn Taymiyyah. Because when you ask them about anything else that doesn't involve Ibn Taymiyyah, like when Aisha wanted to be buried with a piece of a cloth from the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or like when the companion came and put his face on the grave of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what would the Wahhabis say? He would say, I don't care who did it, it's shirk. But if Ibn Taymiyyah were involved in here somehow, if it was something that Ibn Taymiyyah narrated, then he's going to find a way to exonerate Ibn Taymiyyah. Here's a fourth reference. A companion went to the Prophet's grave and asked for help, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. Among the evidence of tawassul by the Prophet and others, using them as a means for the supplication to be answered, whether during their lives or after their deaths, is what was narrated by Hafiz al-Bayhaqi, with his chain of narration mentioned in the Arabic text. So we're going to skip the chain of narration. An Malik ad-Dar, from the route of Malik ad-Dar, that he said, أصاب الناس قحط في زمن عمر بن الخطاب. The people were inflicted with a famine at the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. فجاء رجل إلى قبر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So a man came to the grave of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. فقال, and he said, استسقي لأمتك فإنهم قد هلكوا. Seek the rain for your nation, for certainly they are perishing. فأتاه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في المنام. Then the messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم came to him in a dream. فقال, and he said, إيتي عمر, go to Umar, فأقرئه مني السلام, and pass the salam to him from me. وأخبره أنهم مسقون, and inform him that they will be irrigated. وَقُلْ لَهُ عَلَيْكَ بِالْكَيْسِ الْكَيْسِ, and say to him, endeavor, endeavor. فَأَتَى الرَّجُلُ, and so the man came, yani he went to Umar. فَأَخْبَرَ عُمَر, and he informed Umar, he told him. فَقَال, and then Umar said, يَا رَبِّ ما آلوا إلا ما عجزت عنه. Omar said, oh my Lord, I do not fall short except in what I am unable to do. That means that Omar didn't know what he was missing. When the Prophet said to him, endeavor, endeavor, Omar didn't know what he missed, which was praying the rain prayer. Hafiz ibn Kathir, who is trustworthy to the Wahhabis, he narrated this and then immediately said afterwards, وَهَذَا إِسْنَادٌ صَحِيحٌ. This is an authentic chain of narration. What a Wahhabi might say about that? He might say, and this is a dirty tactic here, he might say, well, Ibn Kathir only said the chain of narration is authentic. He didn't say the hadith is authentic. You tell him, that's how they say the hadith is authentic. By saying the chain of narration is authentic. That's how they deem the hadith authentic. The identity of that person who went to the grave was the companion Bilal ibn al-Harith. That is found in another version of the story, also narrated by Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir narrated, فَأَخْبَرَهُمْ بِقَوْلِ الْمُزَنِي. And so Umar informed the people about what Al-Muzani said. وَهُوَ بِلَالُ ibn al-Harith. And he is Bilal ibn al-Harith. He's a companion. That's his name. فَفَطِنُوا وَلَمْ يَفْطَنْ. And they understood, but Umar did not understand. فَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا اسْتَبْطَأَكَ فِي الْإِسْتِسْقَاءِ فَاسْتَسْقِ بِنَا. They said, he is only considering that you have been slow in performing the rain prayer. So lead us in the rain prayer. That's a devastating proof against the Wahhabis. Question: what if the Wahhabi claims that the hadith is weak? Then produce Ibn Kathir's authentication of the hadith. He is reliable to them. Question: what if the Wahhabi claims that there's no evidence in dreams? You might say, there's no evidence here. He saw a dream. Tell them that that is beside the point, the fact that he saw the dream. The evidence is not in the dream. The evidence is in the doing of the companion while no one objected to him. See how slick they are? Always trying to get away. Instead of being honest and fearing Allah and saying, oh, subhanallah, I didn't know that. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. I retract my wrong convictions. Question: what if the Wahhabis say their silence to his deed was their objection? Then tell them, stop talking then, since you claim to follow the Salaf. Do like them and be silent. If their way of objecting to that companion was that they didn't say anything, then since you object to us, shut your mouth. Do like them. You say you're a Salafi. Also, objecting to a bad deed is by speaking up, not by being silent. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, مَنْ رَأَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ. Any one of you who saw something forbidden, then let him change it by his hand. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. If unable, then by his tongue. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. If unable, then by his heart. With his heart he must hate it. And also you can add another thing. You say to that Wahhabi, did you ever hear of something called Ijma' Sukuti? Ijma'un Sukuti. When all the mujtahids know of something and not a single one of them speak about it. None of them say anything about it. Then becomes a consensus. Because if it were haram to some of them, someone would have said something. And here's a fifth point. The Arabic language does not support their claim. Question: does calling in Arabic imply worship? Not at all. In fact, Arabic's equivalent to the vocative case is literally called al-munada, the called one. The scholar said that the munada is in essence a direct object. Because had one said, Ya Abdullah, it is as if he said, I call Abdullah. This is literally what they said. Check any book of Nahu. There are a number of particles used for calling, namely Ya. That's the original one, the main one. Like Ya Zaid, it means oh Zaid. There's no worship there, whether he's alive, or he passed away, or he's present, or he's absent. They also literally discuss which of the calling particles is for calling someone close or far. They said that with this particle, yeah, in particular, you can call the close and the far. So if he's not in your presence, you say, yeah. They didn't say, but then it's going to be worship though. And with the hamza of calling, you can call someone who is close. So you can say, Azaid. It means, oh, Zaid, but he's close. You don't say that if he's far. And there are other particles. Imam al-Hariri said, وَنَادِ مَنْ تَدْعُوا بِيَا أَوْ بِأَيَا أَوْ هَمْزَةٍ أَوْ أَيْ وَإِنْ شِئْتَ هَيَا. Call whomever you call by using ya, or by aya, or by the hamza, or a, and if you want, haya. Those are all particles of calling. The munada has many cases and branches. One is the special munada called al-mustaghathu bih, the one whose help is sought. That's exactly what the Wahhabis say is shirk. What the Wahhabis call shirk has its own chapter in grammar. And none of the grammarians said, but this has the implication of worship. In his grammar book, the explanation of Qatrun Nada, Ibn Hisham, may Allah have mercy upon him, defined this specific munada as كل اسم نودي ليخلص من شدة أو يعين على دفع مشقة. It is every name called for relief from trouble or for assistance in repelling difficulty. An example of this is that story of Ibn Umar that we just got out of. That's a case of al-mustaghathu bih. When the person said, mention the name of the most beloved to you, because he was in trouble, his leg was sick. So he sought assistance in repelling difficulty. So he said, Ya Muhammad. That's grammatically called al-mustaghathu bih, one whose help is sought. The point of what has been mentioned here is to clarify that the scholars have already known what it means to call someone seeking his help. And the difference between calling who is present or absent, they talked about that. And they never said that in the case of death or absence, calling turns into worship. That's a Wahhabi innovation. Had that been a meaning given by the Arabic, someone on God's green earth would have documented it. Therefore, for the Wahhabis to say that Ibn Taymiyyah did not approve of calling on the dead, as they so creepily call it, or that he didn't approve of seeking help from the dead, is a great lie that he only commits for his sire Ibn Taymiyyah. The dead and the absent. Question: why does the Wahhabi think that calling someone who has died or is absent is shirk? The Wahhabis claim it is not permissible to call someone who is not alive or is absent because they do not hear, and that if you did so, you committed shirk because you must have believed in the godhood of the dead or absent one to think that he can hear you and then help you. So it goes back to then the story of Abraham with the dead birds. According to their definition of things, Abraham's calling the dead birds applies here. Then he would be a mushrik. The response is that this claim lacks evidence. And in fact, it is against the evidence. Ibn Abbas narrated, قام إبراهيم على الحجر. Ibrahim stood upon the stone. فقال, and he said, يا أيها الناس كتب عليكم الحج. O people, Hajj has been made obligatory upon you. فأسمع من في أصلاب الرجال وأرحام النساء. He made those who were in the spines of the men as seminal fluid, and the wombs of the women hear. فأجابه من آمن ومن كان سبق في علم الله أنه يحج إلى يوم القيامة. And whoever was to believe and whoever was eternally known by Allah that he would perform the Hajj until Judgment Day responded, لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك اللهم لبيك. We obey you, O Allah, we obey. According to some narrations, he made everyone in the heavens and earth hear him. Is not Islam supposed to be the religion of Abraham? It is indeed. Islam is the religion of Abraham. It seems the Wahhabiyya know better, because that is the second reason why Prophet Ibrahim is a mushrik in their religion. Question: what if the Wahhabi excuses Abraham by saying that he was a prophet? Say, then you're going back on your invalid rule, like you did the last time. You claim that those who are not alive or who are far cannot hear. You did not say the first time, unless the one who calls them is a prophet, and nor do you truly believe that. He's only saying that now because we cornered him. You don't really believe that, Wahhabi, because you misinterpret the verse that we will clarify. إِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. Surely you cannot make the dead hear, Muhammad. So you can't turn around and say, well, Abraham was a prophet. Okay, then what about this ayah? إِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. This ayah addresses a prophet. Surely you cannot make the dead hear. But the Wahhabi misinterprets this ayah. We're going to clarify it, inshallah. So we pose a question, wanting only a yes or no. Very important. You have seen this several times since we've been going through this book. When you ask him a question and you want him to tell you yes or no, don't accept other than yes or no. If he refuses to answer, then stop the conversation there. Don't let him bypass your question. So we ask him, and the answer is yes or no. Is it a condition that the one who hears be alive and present? He must say no. He has to, based on all the proofs. If he says, not if the caller is a prophet, then what about what is confirmed about Umar, who is not a prophet? Giving a speech in Al-Madinah, then suddenly interrupting himself to call out to Sariya, the commander of the army in Persia. He said, Sariya, the mountain, the mountain. Later, the army's messenger came and told of how the enemy had prepared an ambush and how they heard Umar's voice saying to take the mountain. So they took the mountain as cover and avoided the ambush. This is narrated by Al-Bayhaqi in Al-I'tiqad and by others. It's documented in the book of Al-Lalika'i, and they like that book, the Wahhabis. They like the book of Al-Lalika'i. They spread it amongst themselves because Al-Lalika'i, he documents a lot of mutashabih texts in this book. And if they say, well, it's not authentic, which is not, it's not true, but if they were, then say to them, so what's his judgment for citing shirk according to you? Is he citing shirk according to you? Don't let the Wahhabi get away. And this story is very famous and confirmed. The Imams use this story as evidence for karamatul awliya, the karamas of the awliya, yani the supernatural sainthood privileges. Most likely, the ignorant Wahhabi will deny this story if he doesn't know it, and then you told him. If you cite this story in your debate with the Wahhabi, and he never heard this story, most likely he'll deny it. Without evidence, of course, because Wahhabis, they don't have precision. He'll deny something having no idea, because he would rather adhere to his empty false beliefs than submit to religious evidence. As for the one who knows this story, but he never connected the dots, he didn't realize that this story directly contradicts his convictions, but he knows it's the right story, he just never put those two together, then he will be silent, insha'Allah. So, if calling someone depends on him being alive and present, or else it is shirk, then to the Wahhabis, along with Adam and Ibn Abbas and the four Imams and Ibrahim, the messenger of Allah, Umar is a mushrik. Question: is there any evidence that the dead can hear? We confirm that the dead can hear because of our belief in the barzakh, the life in the grave. When a person is buried, his soul and consciousness return, but he is in a state different than the people who did not yet lose their souls. He remains like that until his body decays, if his body is among those that decay. For example, there is the hadith of Ibn Abbas from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ما من أحد يمر بقبر أخيه المؤمن كان يعرفه في الدنيا فيسلم عليه إلا عرفه ورد عليه السلام. There is not one of you that passes by the grave of his fellow believer that he knew in the dunya and gives him the salam, except that dead one would know him and return his salam. Also, Al-Bukhari and Muslim narrated from the route of Anas from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he said, إن العبد إذا وضع في قبره وتولى عنه أصحابه وإنه ليسمع قرع نعالهم إذا انصرفوا. Certainly, when the slave is put into his grave and his companions turn away from him, he will hear the steps of their sandals as they leave. وَإِنَّهُ لَيَسْمَعُ قَرْعَ نِعَالِهِمْ. That's in Bukhari and Muslim. He hears. There is no evidence for them in saying. There is no evidence for them in. There's no evidence for them in that saying of Allah that they always use, the one we said we're going to clarify. إِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. Surely you cannot make the dead hear, O Muhammad. They say, this ayah proves that the dead don't hear. No, it doesn't prove that the dead don't hear. They misinterpret this ayah. Rather, this ayah likens the blasphemers to the dead. That's a metaphor, as proven by the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was calling living people to Islam, not dead people. How could they sensibly interpret this ayah to be in reference to the Prophet talking to dead people? As if they're saying the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was committing shirk, trying to convince dead people in their graves, talking to dead people thinking that they could hear him and respond to him. So then Allah revealed to him, إِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. Muhammad, what are you doing? You cannot make the dead hear. That's shirk, what you are doing. That's Wahhabi understanding. The Prophet was calling living people to Islam, not dead people. So it does not mean that the dead cannot hear, because there are several pieces of evidence proving that the dead do indeed hear. We just gave some, like what was just mentioned, as well as the belief in the questioning of angels, Munkar and Nakir, their interrogation, the interrogation of the grave. They ask the dead, and the dead people answer them. That means they can hear. And also the incident when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the casualties of the Battle of Badr, he said to them, he addressed the dead, and he said to them, وَجَدْتُم مَّا وَعَدَ رَبُّكُمْ حَقًّا. Have you found what your Lord promised you to be true? It was then said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Messenger of Allah, do you call the dead? He responded, Ma antum bi asma'a minhum, walakin la yujibun. You do not hear better than they do. However, they do not answer. How could a Wahhabi know this hadith exists and maintain his creed? But that's what it means to be misguided. If Allah misguided a person, then he will not accept. That's why the scholars called the devious beliefs hawa. Hawa means hub, love. Because the person, he loves the idea that he has, the notion that he has, he loves it. He prefers it over the truth. So he would claim to be a Muslim, and he would have a hawa, some notion that he prefers, and when you give him an authentic hadith, he won't accept. And when you prove to him that it's authentic, he still won't accept. All he's going to do is be silent because he can't find an answer. You should know that the prophets are alive in their graves and their bodies do not decay. It was narrated in the hadith of Anas from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Al-Anbiya'u ahya'un fi quburihim yusallun. The prophets are alive in their graves praying. You should also know that the Wahhabi conviction about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he loses his status after death. And for that reason, many of them insult the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after his death, and they call him Jifa, corpse. They say, why are you calling that Jifa? Why are you asking that Jifa? Or they say, a stick is more useful than him because he has died. They would never dare to say something like that about Ibn Taymiyyah, and they would probably punish whoever does. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Allah knows best.